Welcome to The Science and the Sacred. I'm your host, Sinead Brophy, and in this podcast, we'll cover both the physiology and the spirituality of what it means to be a cyclical being. I'd love to invite you, my health-conscious and spiritually curious friend, to dive deep with me as we embrace the power of cyclical self-care to nourish our minds, bodies, and souls.
Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of The Science and the Sacred. And in this episode, it's my experience of ectopic pregnancy part 2. So what I wanted to use this episode more for was to talk about, I guess, more the emotional side of the whole experience, and also kind of how I've tried to deal with that and kind of the language and the framework that I've used around it. In the last episode in part 1, that was more going into like what it is, I guess, like how I actually physically went through the whole process of it, like what happened from trying to conceive to the pregnancy test to, then finding out it was ectopic. I kind of spoke a little bit about it at the end. I guess I referenced what I'd be talking about now. So this may be heavy. Some of what I say might not resonate at all. People might find it really useful. It might resonate to other parts of their lives or other experiences that people have been going through, or it may be totally different. I'm purely speaking about how I have moved through this period of time and how I'm still moving, because I'm still moving through it. And everything I say is purely that, just my own experience and how I'm kind of putting a bit of a framework on it. And I guess how my own professional background, I guess, is kind of given me some tools that have helped me to get through that. And I say it as if it's a done thing. It's not a done thing. This is, it's always going to be there. And I'm sure it's going to be particularly raw at the start now during this period, and it will hopefully get easier. And I actually wanted to open it with a quote that I read from a book. And let me get the name of the book. My Kindle will play well. Called Tell Me How This Is. So as I mentioned in the last episode, literally all I could do for a week, 2 weeks, maybe even more, was read. I couldn't really walk, couldn't really do anything. Definitely for that first week, I was just pretty much, I was bedbound. Nor was I was allowed to do anything more than walk or stand. And that was actually one of the doctors told me. She was like, if it's more than walking or standing and it's going to involve your core or any sort of loading or twisting to the core, she's like, you're not really supposed to do it because it's a risk of rupture. So while I was reading a million different books, using my Kindle Unlimited to its absolute max, I came across this book and it was quite enjoyable. It is, it's a little bit sad. It's kind of talking about a woman who has a job who's kind of taking the stories of people in a terminal care unit, or it's a cancer kind of care station. And if you were watching the video version of this rather than listening to the podcast, beautiful light has just come through my window, little rainbow. So it's actually really lovely. So go check it out on YouTube if you're listening to this on the podcast. But the book was quite nice. This kind of story comes up through it, but in it is this beautiful part of one woman's story, and she's writing her book, her story for her daughter. And there's a excerpt in it that I was just like, holy moly, that is the most beautiful definition of grief, and I guess what I'm going through at the moment. And I'm sure what anyone who's ever lost anyone that they've loved, and I guess for me, this person didn't come into being, but the high that I felt and the future that I painted for myself, was very much a love-filled one, and that potentiality is hard to lose. So for me, when I was reading this, I was like, wow, this is actually a beautiful description of what grief is, because it references love. And I'll read it out for you now. At first, you'll feel as if a huge hole has opened up in front of you, but slowly the edges will soften and the hole will start to fill up. As time goes on, you won't fall into it quite so often, and eventually you'll be able to stand on the edge and look into it. Remember, Grief is the price we pay for love. Be kind to yourselves. The first year will be the hardest, and love yourselves as much as I love you. So for me, that analogy of the whole being not so big, as the years go by, and that you won't fall into it so often, I was like, okay, that kind of gives me a little bit of hope and gives me a bit of I guess a really beautiful visual analogy for me to hold on to, because it's an absolute emotional roller coaster. And I think it's hard until you've experienced some sort of grief. And particularly, I think, with regards to like an early pregnancy loss, that roller coaster that you feel is hard to explain, where you go from such a high. And it's when I think of those early days when, I got the pregnancy test and I catch myself in the mirror and I put my hands on my belly and I start kind of thinking of this future for myself and Craig. That when I think of that, and like even now I'm like, oh shit, stop. Like it's like your heart does a little like lurch. You're like, oh, it kind of feels like it just drops down the floor, as if we're like, when you miss a step when you're walking down the stairs, or no, it's when you're going up the stairs and you think there's gonna be an extra one and then you kind of step and like you jump down, you like land hard. That's kind of what it feels like. I'm like here, and my heart just like drops down to my diaphragm. I'm like, oh, gut punch. Those hugs are less, but there are definite moments where it is hard. I also have taken a bit of a kind of step back from a lot of stuff that I'm doing in work, and I am going on my honeymoon at the end of the summer for 2 months. So I think that will be a really nice break for me, just to be like, woosah, what am I doing? Let's just breathe. So I'm kind of like, right, let's just get through the summer. But what I do a lot is women's health, and I do pregnancy and postnatal classes, and that's something that I plan to kind of start building back up again, because I absolutely love it. I've kind of used the last 2 years, I guess, to kind of really figure out what it is I enjoy and like doing. And for me, it's really that women's health, like stepping into your strength from a really kind of deep place. It's understanding your body, your cycle, your intuition in a way to bring you forward. And as part of that, it's that pregnancy postnatal. Like I love that style of training, because you're training to be strong as a parent, as a mother, as someone who's going to give birth, someone who's going to be looking after a child. And that focus from a movement and health and a well-being point of view, I just absolutely love. I just love that whole focus of it. And the same with kind of the fertility awareness side of things, the menstrual cycle awareness things. It's just a really beautiful focus. But that can be a little bit challenging when you've just gone through pregnancy loss. And so there have been times that maybe I haven't made the best decisions about going to things with my friends that have a lot of kids around. We're seeing newborns. I thankfully, I had to, just from a physical point of view, but it was a bit thankful, where I was supposed to be starting a new block of pregnancy and postnatal training when I thought I initially miscarried and then turned out to be ectopic. And I was like, you know what, this is actually a good thing that I'm not doing this for another 4 weeks, because I was like, I don't think I'm ready. Because some days you're totally fine, and other days it's like there are reminders everywhere. And it is just part and parcel of life. Your friends are going to give birth, you're going to see pregnancy announcements on Instagram, you're going to talk to friends about trying to conceive, you're going to be working with people who are pregnant. It's very much in the world that I work in and live in. And there are times when I'm like, yeah, cool, I'm totally fine with this. And other ones I'm like, excuse me, while I go puke in the toilet, because I'm so devastated. Like, and you can flip from that in like a heartbeat. That's what I've found. I think when it all first happened, as I mentioned in the last podcast, when I initially thought I was miscarrying, and then when I initially found out that I was ectopic, it was like pure devastation. Like the miscarriage, oh my God. Like I'd say, as I mentioned last episode, that next door probably were like, what is happening with the neighbors. But it was pure gut wrenching howling, pure grief in its purest form. And I was lucky that Greg was there with me, kudos to him, because he's, going through his own grief, and he was just excited as I am. I'm physically going through it, but he's emotionally going through it just as much as I am. And he very beautifully held me in all of those moments. But for me, I then totally disassociated. And it's almost like there's actually a photo of me and Craig in the hospital, where I'm on the hospital bed waiting for the methotrexate, and there's a selfie, and it's like, I'm not into, that much. I literally do a bit of content for the Instagram. I'm not really into taking a million and one photos, but I was actually sending it to my friend, being like, oh, we're just bored out of our heads. Because once it happened, and I freaked out, and I realized I was okay, and then Craig came, then it was like, you kind of just, you're like, okay, it's happening, cool, right, I'm fine. And you're like, obviously you're not fine, but you're just like, yeah, great, okay, it's happening, it's all good, I'll get through it, this is fine. Great. And you're just having conversations about normal stuff, about work, about whatever, just getting back into it. And then a couple of days later, for me anyway, I was like, oh God, right, this has happened. Am I going to be okay? What's happening physically in my body? Like, I went to the battle for cancer thing, turned up, obviously couldn't do it, but brought a fucking camping chair to sit in it to cheer people on. I didn't need to be there. I was supposed to be going to a hospital appointment. And I did go to the hospital appointment. I drove. When I think about it now, but at the time, and again, I mentioned last episode about me doing the Instagram posts, the next day, or, I was answering an email about the launching the podcast, from a hospital. I just needed something normal to do to help me pretend that this wasn't happening and that my life wasn't changing forever. And for anyone who knows me, even though my business is called Go with Flow, I can sometimes really struggle to not have control of things. Used to be a product manager, used to be a project manager, worked in consulting, yada yada yada. I've quite a logical, although it's also creative, I do have quite a logical brain as well, and I like that organization. I like putting the structure. I like pulling these little pieces out from everywhere, all these different things, and putting them together into a plan. And then I used to, hand that over to the development team, and it would get done. And I would manage that, and I would oversee it, and I'd be able to, do all the things and kind of plan for all the bits and put it all together. And that's what I'm used to. I wanted to get a grade, I wanted to get a distinction, and blah. Okay, cool. This is my plan. I'd work it out and I'd go for it. That's what I would do in life. And I was like, oh wow, God, we're so lucky. This all went so according to plan, because I was trying to be very, we were trying to conceive. I was trying to be very we don't know what's going to happen. I'm really just going to surrender to all this and see what happens. We'll have the crack. And I kind of got a bit wobbly for the first month or two, where I was like, oh, it didn't happen straight away, because for some of our friends, it did happen straight away. And I was like, they're a weird small microcosm of the world. For most people, it doesn't happen that way. Yada, yada, yada. And I was like, right, I'm and then it was only when I, had to go through this whole experience that I was like, oh, this is surrendering, because I can't do anything to change this. I can't do anything to change this. And there's no plan B, there's no whatever. It's like, I can't change anything. And this medicine that I'm taking means that I can't just jump back in to trying to conceive straight away. I have to wait for 3 or 4 months, maybe more. I have to take that time. I can't physically train, swim, really move that much, do yoga. I can't do it. I can't work. I can't coach. I couldn't do anything. It was full and complete surrender in its greatest sense. And that for me was a lesson, and was very difficult, even though it's something that I advocate a lot of. And I would have thought that, even though I am a self-proclaimed control freak, because I am a self-proclaimed control freak and know that I tend towards perfectionism and over planning and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Now, anyone who's into human design, you're just listening to this being like, but you're just a one, like that's, you got line one, that's totally fine. You just like helps you feel prepared for life, and then you kind of go with it. And that is normally how I do things. I feel like do all my research, and then I'm like, let's, you know, go with it. And that's what I would do for holidays. I'd kind of do look up loads of things. I'm like, oh, it's good, it's good. But I wouldn't really plan that much. I'd kind of, you know, make decisions once I'm there. Might have a few things booked. But because I know that I am that way, and I like to over research and over plan, and, you know, kind of try and control things, and if something's not working, well, then I'm going to make a plan B, and I'm going to do something else, and, you know, very, I guess, resilient in that way, and driven in that way, in that respect. And, you know, those things can be superpowers. But I would have thought that I was good at trying to balance that, surrendering and slowing down and taking rest, you know, doing the restorative activities to make sure that I'm not overstressed and overtraining, and that, you know, I'd make sure I do my grounding exercises so that I'm not so much in my head, I'm down into my body. Again, anyone who's into astrology, I'm all air, all air and fire. There's like very little earth in my sign. And that is very much shown through me needing to do things like yoga, get outside in nature, see swim. I need to do the things that are going to ground me. And I just lost all of those tools to bring me from my head down into my body. Now, what I did have was obviously reading, which I love. I did have my breathing exercises. I did have therapy, which was so, so important. And I did have kind of my little ceremonies and meditation, and kind of some sort of ritual around that. They all have massively helped me, as has my support network. So although I couldn't use physical movement to get from my head into my body, I could use some breathing techniques, you know, albeit kind of gentle ones, and, you know, just diaphragmatic breathing or the Nadi Shodhana, like that did help. Same with kind of doing a little ritual, or, you know, the ritual really did help me. And this might sound really strange for some people, but that Monday that I ended up what I thought was miscarrying, after Sunday, I was like, right, I think this is going this way. I got up that morning and I had a little cacao ceremony, and I lay out all my little, you know, I have these kind of pregnancy stones and these little kind of gorgeous sea glass that my auntie gave me and Craig from the beach near where we got married. And, you know, they all kind of had symbolism, and had been what I had been meditating and manifesting with for the last while, you know, basically calling in a pregnancy. And I kind of put all them out, and then my little Gaia stone, or not stone, Gaia statue. So it's a little kind of pregnancy woman, Mother Earth. And I just sat with it, and I was like, and I said it from day one, when we got pregnant, I was like, if you are happy and healthy, we want you to stay. I was like, you are going to be so loved. But if you aren't, and there's a reason that you need to go, you need to go. Like, we let you go, we're going to release you, kind of a thing. So I was that ritual really like prepared me for the fact that I was, you know, going to miscarry. Then came along the ectopic side of things, and that just threw a whole different spanner into the works. But that breath work, that ritual really, really helped me. The other thing that really helped me was therapy, as I mentioned. So I had already been going to therapy kind of since the start of the year. You know, winter had been tough for me post wedding. It was kind of this huge big crash. I was like, what am I doing with my business? I like closed up the membership. I was like, right, we're going to kind of, you know, grow from the ashes, do the whole Celtic wheel, you know, do the winter, the dark night of the soul, come into spring, come into summer. And I was like, oh, it's all flowing. I'm like in that solar energy. It's pregnant. All the things I'm working on are coming out. And like these big visions for work, all this kind of stuff. But because I'd had such a tough time during winter, and I always find winters hard, I think I, you know, might have sad, or I just maybe need to be near the sun more. I definitely find the darker months more challenging. And thankfully, that meant that I'd started going back to therapy in January. So I had pretty much 6 months of good therapy with an excellent therapist under my belt who really helped me move from a place of like total dysregulation, like I was completely a mess at the start of the year, to being a lot more like in my body and able to kind of understand what's happening, or maybe not over intellectualize things, like get that lovely balance of being like, I am feeling this, but here's how I'm communicating it. Where I would go from one to the other, I'd be like fully feeling the feeling, or I'd be like completely shut down, being like, so this is what's happening and I know what's happening and it's this, but I do this thing and I don't know how to stop it. I'd be like, it's the CBT, blah, 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 blah. And I'd like, put all the language on it, and completely be cerebral about it. I wouldn't be in my body about it at all. So she really helped me kind of find this path where I was feeling both, and, communicating how I was feeling, communicating how I was feeling to friends, not shutting myself off, communicating with Craig, my parents, all of this kind of stuff. So when this happened, I had this person who knew my backstory, knew what I'd been working on, how I'd been processing. So when I came in and was like, this is what's happened, we could just deal with that. We could just focus on that. And I had that relationship that I was able to feel vulnerable in and talk through all of that. I know as well that there's lots of really good support networks. There's kind of Miscarriage Ireland. There's also some ectopic pregnancy groups as well, both in Ireland and the UK. I've yet to try them. I'm sure I will. To be honest, one of the reasons I haven't is because it clashes with work, because I work in the evenings. So I do want to look up those because I think that support network is incredibly important. And that's the other thing that's been hugely helpful for me over the last while, is the support network. Knowing that my mum was coming back, my dad was coming back, knowing that my husband was there, knowing that my best friends knew what was happening, knowing that my family around me, like my extended family, that my friends, my colleagues, like they knew what was going on. That is incredibly important. And then the support network on Instagram, which I was really surprised by, because I really in the past would have not liked social media. I was like, it's like just a marketplace, it's just salesy. You get these people coming on and being like, hey, I'm going to help you scale your business, yada 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 yada, blah blah blah. And then I've had some not fantastic experience with the coaches being like, you just have to be told, message people, and blah, and it's all like building relationships. I'm like, that's not building relationships. However, now I actually really do like when I connect with people who have started following me or they're commenting, because I'm like, well, this is actually a relationship. And when I put up that post on about the fact that I had experienced an ectopic pregnancy, quite a lot of people, friends and family, got in contact with me to be like, I've had a miscarriage, I had this. But people on Instagram also got in contact with me and shared their experience. And it made me realize, how common pregnancy loss, pregnancy release is, and how supportive it is, definitely for me to be able to talk to other people about it. And I'm sure I made people uncomfortable along the way, but I was like, I don't really, not that I don't care, that sounds terrible, but I was like, I know that I need to share, and the right people who want to talk to me about it and who can have those conversations with me will have those conversations with me. And if someone can't, that's totally fine, and we'll move on. But even me just talking about the conversation normalizes it for anyone who does want to bring it up. And I've always admired people who maybe spoke about their own loss, or maybe their own experiences of trying to conceive. And then for other people, they in no way want it to be public, and it's a very private thing, and that's how they're going to process it, and they're only talking to their close friends and family. So it's really about finding the support that's going to suit you best. So for me, my husband, my parents in particular, my close friends and family in particular, and then my kind of extended circles out from that. I do think that at some stage I'll probably go and talk to some circle or a group or support network at a wider extent for people who have experienced pregnancy release or pregnancy loss, because I think I will find that incredibly cathartic. Because when I did speak to people about it, particularly about ectopic pregnancy, when someone else had mentioned they experienced ectopic pregnancy, the understanding that they had of how confusing it is, how isolating it is, how you will go from feeling fine, like you're like, I'm fine, I'm resilient, I'm going to get through this, to then being devastated, to then being like, God, I'm so lucky nothing bad happened. And like, look how grateful I am for all of this that I have in my life, to then being devastated again, to then being like furious that like the cups are stacked the wrong way. To then like, and you'd feel that all within 24 hours. Like it's just, I have yet, this is my first time experiencing these fluctuations in such a range of emotions over the last while. That's been the hardest thing for me. So I do think that for me, at some stage, I will go and speak to some group or seek out those people who have had similar experiences, because that level of understanding and being able to talk about that and know that you're not going to get judged for that. Not that I think anyone else is, but just knowing that they're like, yeah, I totally get it. And like, you do get it, you know, that there's something very comforting and safe in that. So they have been huge tools for me. What I've also found really useful, and I did do a story on this, and I had a couple of friends get in contact with me about it, and some people online as well, but I did do a story about it being like the framework that cyclical wisdom, cyclical living, whichever way you want to call it, really that framework of the inner seasons of menstrual cycle awareness, and then the Celtic wheel of the seasons of the year from a Eurocentric point of view, and applying that to our life and where we are in our life and the lessons of that. That framework, coupled with my support network, coupled with my therapy, coupled with, you know, all the other stuff that I've spoken about, that really, really helped me put context to what I was going through. And I'm going to be incredibly careful here and make sure that it's clear that I'm not trying to be toxically positive, because some of that stuff drives me absolutely mental. And I've been in situations where I've been in these like thought leadership things, and people come in and they talk about like growth mindset and yada, yada, yada. And you were like in the depths of despair for whatever you're going through. And you're like, look, basically F off with that stuff. Like, how can you expect me to come, you know, out of this thing? And there's that awful video that I actually hate so much, which is that one, I don't know who it is, so sorry, but I don't really care if I'm going to offend you here. It's that clip of that guy, I think he's on a podcast, and I'm totally misquoting here, it's just more the sentiment, but it's like, you know, business failed, good. Something bad happened, good. Something awful happened, good. You know, and like all this crap about how like you build up and it makes you stronger and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's back up here. Yes, there's normally a lesson in everything. And yes, you know, you experience these things and you're like, oh God, I do actually get through it. But also, as my friend said to me, shit stuff just happens to good people. So I think it's really important to make sure that when you're being grateful for stuff, or sorry, I'm going to speak in the I because I can only speak for myself. I think it's incredibly important that when I am being grateful for things, or when I'm saying, well, at least this, that I'm not doing that in a way that's discounting how I am feeling and how awful it is and how hard the emotions are and the sense of loss and how painful it is, because it's painful. It's really hard. You see a newborn baby walking down the street and you're like, oh, that should be me. Like that's where your head goes to. Will that be me? Will I be able to get that? I had that hope, that brief blip of like my dream come true for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then it has been ripped away from me. And you know, I can't do anything about it. Sorry, A, I can't do anything about it, but B, I can't try again or start again or kind of pursue that dream again in any way, shape, or form for the next few months. That is awful. Like, let's call a spade a spade. That is incredibly difficult to have as a reality. And I know that there is much worse stuff out there as well. Like there's, you know, grief and loss and life experiences. Like it's being a human sucks sometimes. It just really does. I'm also acknowledging that I'm incredibly grateful for so many things. And there's been a lot of beautiful stuff to come out of this experience, as I mentioned, with the support that I've got from the people who love me, and being able to have that network around me, and being in a country where I can get access to healthcare, and the public system is actually pretty decent. At least my experience of going through the public system for all of this has been, it was excellent, in my opinion. I think you can have those two things coincide, and yeah, that's really all I'm going to say on that. But I think it's really important to make sure that when I'm talking about these things, being like, well, the lessons that I learned, and this is what I'm taking out of it, that I'm not doing it from a point of view of A, I'm ungrateful for what I have, B, I'm discounting the experience that I had, or C, I'm saying that I am better or blah because I've got this learning out of it. That's in no way what I'm saying, because everyone's experience is going to be different. Everyone's situation is going to be different. Everyone's response is going to be different. Everyone's support network and coping mechanisms are going to be different. For me, I found it reassuring to have some framework to understand the experiences of life that we can go through. I would be quite a spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. I was born Catholic, baptized, went through all of that, never really connected with that aspect of it. Just wasn't, before, I guess, even our history became more apparent in Ireland about how the Catholic Church had a massive lack of care for mothers, women, children. I just never really connected with the heaven, hell, single God thing. I've always had more of a connection with like energy and stuff like this. So obviously this whole kind of expansion now of like I guess universe, source, the more widespread adoption of yoga, as obviously it's got a physical side to it, and that's a whole other conversation, but the more spiritual side of it, and chakras and Reiki and energy flow and all of this sort of stuff, it all kind of slots into my brain a lot better, and it's a language that I can understand and can use. So for me, having that sort of framework of understanding of like the via negativa, the via positiva, the masculine, the feminine, things like winter and the dark night of the soul, and how it might be summertime, because this all happened at the summer solstice, where I felt I was for a brief moment in the summer solstice and then massively fell off the cliff and was like thrown into the depths of winter. But because I knew what was happening emotionally and energetically, I was like, okay, I'm in winter. I'm in winter now. I'm in a winter in my personal life. I'm a winter in my professional life. I'm a winter in my physical body. I cannot move. I cannot do. I am completely unmotivated to do anything in my business. And my priority right now is to rest, is to slow down, is to surrender. And I know that, like all of the cycles in the world, that I will move out of this winter phase, out of this deep, dark awfulness, this tumultuous, not really knowing what is coming next. It's like a complete blank canvas of my life. I don't know. My plan has completely gone out the window. And that's kind of been repeated across a couple of different things in my personal and both professional life and in the background. It's almost like it was all kind of loosely held together, and then one peg went, and actually the world was like, you know what? Actually, we're just gonna totally wipe that slate clean and we'll start again. So that was all happening at the same time. And I was like, right, I'm now in winter. And I know through menstrual cycle awareness that winter is a time for deeply asking for help, asking for people to support you, handing over that ability. It's, it's a deeply feminine time. From the Celtic wheel point of view, it's, the point of time we have the least amount of light. It's that really grounding, nurturing, like deep earth. It's like trying to build up that soil that we're going to plant the seeds in. And I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be in my summer. Like, I'd done all that. I thought I'd done all of that last winter and through various cycles of my year. I was like, I'm not meant to be here, but here I am. And I know through menstrual cycle awareness that if I rest during my winter and try and move out slowly into my spring, that if I do that, I will have enough reserves to have a more energetic, a more healthy, a more balanced summer. And that I won't fall into the hyperproductive masculine, that doing to distract, that doing to move forward. I potentially fell into the risk of it the first week back in work last week, where I was like, right, I'm back, let's go. I'm going to train, I'm going to do this, I'm feeling good. I was like, out the gate. And then I was like, whoa, Sinead, slow down. Like, we're looking at this experience as a very micro cycle. We just went through a couple of weeks of deep winter. And I'm trying to jump into summer again. So I'm like, slow down. I canceled a couple of classes that I booked into, or I did more yoga. I napped. Like, I went for a sea swim on Thursday. I just slept the whole day, slept. And same with Friday. Basically any time I wasn't coaching physically in a class, I was sleeping or lying down. Pretty much. I think I did 1 or 2 sessions, and that was more for my mental health than anything. I actually even wrote a note on my own profile. In the gym that I'm in, we have notes on people's profiles to make sure that we're like alerted on injury. I actually added a note to my own profile, be like, Sinead is coming back from this, make sure she stays at 80%, because I knew myself that I'd be like, I'm back, let's go, PBs, like, so it's like, I'm going to put blinkers on myself, like, the little stabilizers. I'm going to put them on myself and get other people to help me slow the funk down. Because I know my tendencies, having gone through multiple cycles of menstrual cycle awareness, of tracking my own patterns, my own energetic dispositions, my own coping mechanisms, all of this stuff, and both from a micro level with regards to my menstrual cycle, but then also throughout the year and what happens throughout the year. And I'm really, really trying to move a lot of my life to be more in line with that. And it doesn't mean that it has to perfectly line up with the seasons. It just more means that I'm trying to be more aware of the energies that are going on right now. So for me, having this framework of being like, right, I'm in the winter, I know that the summer will come. It's really allowed me to take the pressure off myself and catch myself when I'm falling into old patterns of doing, of hyper productivity, of trying to be too independent, of not asking for help, of not resting, of expecting myself to be on a certain point of that planning that I spoke about, that control, rather than receiving, of knowing when to step back and when to step forward. And this concept that menstrual cycle awareness, the Red School talk about a lot, of holding the tension, of being in one place and transitioning into another, or of holding kind of opposing ideas or thoughts, or being in a situation and having to just sit with it, and it being kind of uncomfortable, but how the alchemy or the transformation can come out of that. And now my husband may not agree with me on this, but whether he wants to admit it or not, I have actually, I think, done way better than me a year ago, me 2, 5, 10 years ago definitely would have been able to handle the situation. I think through the therapy and having the language to explain to myself where I am from a life stage, from what's going on, from the expectations I want to put on myself, the patterns, I have been able to step back a little bit and be like, this is what's happening. And in menstrual cycle awareness, they talk about this, where it's the power of encounter. So they have power of agency and power of encounter. And the power of agency is like that via positiva, that masculine. So in the Celtic wheel, that would be like the solar energy, summer solstice, moving from like the winter solstice, then got Imbolc, Bealtaine, and you're building up towards the whole summer solstice. That's the solar energy. And then it flips and you're into the dark half of the year. So it's the Yamos and Mary Kennedy will kill me. There's two names for it. There's the masculine and the feminine side. I think it's Yamos and Samos. I'll add show notes to this if I've gotten that wrong. And it's the same sort of idea in menstrual cycle awareness, via positiva, via negativa. Via positiva, that masculine is the agency, the moving forward. That risk is that we can go into hyper agency burnout. We do too much because we're not coming from the point of the feminine. And if you think about the yin and yang symbol, you always have a dot of, you know, the white or black within the black and the white. And that's because you need that little bit of the, say, masculine when you're in the winter, when you're in the feminine, you need that little bit of the light, the masculine, to balance out the feminine. And when you're in the solar, in the summer, in the masculine, in the via positiva, you need that little bit of the feminine to make sure that you're staying grounded. It's the same sort of idea. Agency, as I said, is that via positiva. Encounter, which is more like a leaning back and being like, okay, take. It's not passive. It's like a pause. You're like, what's happening? Okay. And then you can just sit with it. You learn more by doing that. And then that informs when you're then taking your next step. I've been really trying to practice. It's been really, really hard. But I have been doing more of it. And it's allowed me to maybe explain to Craig, look, this is coming up. This is going to be very difficult for me. Look, I'm really tired from my first few days back coaching. I need to sleep. Look, this is all I can do. Or flipping out about something, which I have done, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the anger has been the hardest part for me to handle, and I'm sure it's been really hard for Craig to handle as well on the receiving end. But being able to sit with that when something flares, I'm like, I'm really sorry. This is what's happened, rather than letting that snowball and kind of go out of control. Similarly, noticing when I start like overbooking classes that I'm like, oh, well, let's cancel that early morning once you have a lie-in. Do cacao ceremony instead. And then maybe if you're feeling good, go for a lunchtime one and keep it 70, 80%. Things like that. That is hugely, hugely, it's been honestly a game changer for me going through this. And as I said, it's my first time ever experiencing it, and I hope to never experience it again. But for me, having that skill set and having developed that muscle and that language and that framework of being like winter, summer, spring, autumn, this is what's happening. I need to surrender to the feminine and move through all of this and move forward. For me, I've found it incredibly useful. For someone else, that might be your faith, your belief. It might be, you know, a therapy-based approach. It might be some sort of healing modality. It might be something else. But for me, it's been that cyclical wisdom part of it has been really helpful, because I'm like, this is where I'm at. This is what's happening in my life. There is some wisdom in it, whether I want to see that right now, but there is some wisdom in that. And then I can move forward. I know I will get through this. The wisdom for me, and as I said, this is in no way intended as this like, you know, there's a silver lining in it and everything. But for me, the wisdom was, oh wow, if I had died, I had spent the last 2 years trying to set up a business, and that I was accidentally self-sabotaging, so totally procrastinating with a lot of stuff, and then making it really stressful and hard for myself and beating myself up because I wasn't doing X and wasn't achieving Y and blah, 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 blah. I spent 2 years doing that, worrying about all of this stuff, talking to my husband about it, you know, constantly stressed about things, about work that I absolutely love, that I was blocking myself doing well. And I'm like, if I had died or something had happened, I'm like, that's how I've spent. No, that's not true. That's not fair. Yeah, I've had beautiful experiences. I got married, you know, there's been so many gorgeous memories. I've created something, I've met amazing people, I've built this business, and I figured out what I wanted to do. But that was my initial thought, being like, my Lord, what if that's what I spent my last 2 years doing? Where I was like, I wasn't seeking joy those last 2 years. I was surviving. And I was like, I don't really want to survive anymore. I was like, I actually want to thrive. I was like, I want to go out and savor those moments. So that was the first thing. I was like, I was just so like, wow, life doesn't have to be that complicated. So for me, the first lesson was I just need to simplify everything. I was like, I have just made everything too complicated. I'm trying to do too much. I mean, way too, I'm being too scattered with my energy. I was like, I just need to simplify. I was like, what is fun for me right now? What brings me joy from a coaching point of view? What can I let go of? So that's been a huge one of my wisdoms to come out of it. The other one is slowing down. I'm like, I don't need to build all of the ideas and businesses that I have in my head right now. I am early 30s. I might never build them all. It's like, but I'm going to pick the ones based on simplifying that bring me the most joy, make the most sense, allow me to do the things that I love with the people that I love. That's what I'm going to do. And everything else, I'm going to slow down. So when we look at the Celtic wheel, that is that kind of moving from the action to the surrender, the masculine to the feminine, and trusting that, you can't be in the masculine the whole time. It's the same with the menstrual cycle awareness. They talk, or the Red School, I should say, have this cyclical self-care. This, they call it the dark arts, but I like to think of them as cyclical self-care tools, which is called pacing, as I mentioned before. And it's that trusting the divine timing of things. It's trusting that everything can't happen right away. You've got to allow some patience into your life. For me, I am impatient. I like to do, I like to achieve, I like to get places. So for me, that slowing down has been a huge wisdom that, actually, if I simplify everything and if I slow everything down, it's all going to be way more enjoyable. And it will happen when it's all meant to happen. And it'll be far more enjoyable than racing to the finish line. Because it is that whole, analogy is like the goalposts keep moving, or like it's not the destination, it's the journey. And it's true, like it is, it's the journey, it's the memories you make along the way, and it's the enjoyment. Life isn't always going to be peachy keen, but like, can you see those glimmers out there? Can you see those bright moments amongst the darkness? Because my God, they are there, even though we might not feel like we're ever going to see them again. And then the third wisdom, I guess, is surrender. Like, I had to totally surrender and slow down. I couldn't do anything and I couldn't change what was happening. I had to let my body physically heal. And now I'm going to be in a position where I've got to delay trying. So that's going to give me, hopefully, and it's not like you get over it and then you're like box ticked, but like that will allow me some space. Again, that idea of slowing down, not rushing into trying again, to heal myself a bit more, to make that hole, like I said at the start of the episode, a little bit smaller, and that I fall into it a little bit less, so that I'm not as angry all the time, and that the things that normally wouldn't really bother me that much, like I said, the cup shelf not being stacked the right way, now they're driving me mental and triggering rage in me, which is, very difficult for me to deal with. That's not going to happen so much if I allow myself to slow down, if I allow myself to simplify, if I allow myself to surrender. And then this idea that I'm going to have this gorgeous honeymoon and have fun, I am just switching off and letting it go. And I'm really trying to take this time now in my business. Okay, I'm doing this and this is really fun. And, this is one of the few things that I wanted to keep going while I was working through all this, because I like talking. And I think it's really fun. And I'm like, it's what's bringing me joy right now. And but in the back end, I'm kind of tearing everything down and I'm rebuilding it. I'm taking everything that was in my membership and I'm putting it into self-paced courses. I'm figuring out, okay, what do I want to be spending my time on? What type of coaching do I want to be doing? Where do I want to be putting my time and energy? Because work takes up so much of our lives and it can be such a source of stress. And I was like, I love my job. And I want it to be more of the love and less of the struggle, So as I said, for me, those self-care tips when I couldn't move, it was me trying to drop into my body in some way, whether that's through breath work or maybe a little bit of ritual. When I could start moving, it's, starting to gently embody, like doing some stretches, doing a little bit of kind of, the kind of regulation, like shaking, stuff like that. It's about starting to lift again and feel strong again in my body after going through a period where I felt like I was made of glass and had a ticking time bomb in my right hip. And the other support networks was therapy, or the other, self-care tips was support, so therapy, and then my support networks. They've been my pillars, like my friends, my family, my husband, therapy. It's all been so helpful, and will continue to be helpful, because I'm sure I'm going to get angry and sad and feel different things at different times. And if I do get pregnant again, or if I'm talking to someone, all of these things are going to come back up again. And the final one is the cyclical wisdom. Having that framework, that language for me to be able to put a name to what I'm experiencing from a life stage point of view, from an energetic point of view, from an emotional point of view, and be able to put that in a context of a wheel, of something that is cyclical, of something that I'm going to come back to again. I'm sure I'm going to have another dark night of the soul. I'm sure I'm going to have a moment where I need to surrender and slow down. But right now, that's where I am. Even though I wanted to be in summer, I am here, and I will come to my summer at a later stage. And those wisdoms that have come from that is simplifying, is slowing down, and is surrendering. So yeah, that was my TED Talk. I hope you enjoyed it. But as always with these things, I'm really mindful that it is a very sensitive topic, and some of what I might have said might resonate with you. Other parts of it might not at all. But if it's given anyone a little glimmer of hope, or maybe resonated with someone, well, that's great. And sure, if not, it's simply helped me put into words kind of how I've been trying to look after myself the last while. And for me, that's been a great experience and exercise to do. So as always, I thank you so much for listening to me for the past however long this has been, number of minutes. And yes, and in the next episode, I'm going to have the amazing Kitty Maguire on, and we're going to be talking about menstrual cycle awareness for our own experience with it and with grief as well. So thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bye.